The morning of my dad's birthday was quiet, colder than I expected for early spring. I sat by the window, watching the pale light stretch over the empty street outside, the kind of silence that feels heavy, not peaceful. My phone buzzed with messages, reminders, well wishes, little guilt trips disguised as concern. Everyone will be there. It won't be the same without you. You can't keep avoiding this. I read them all, then set the phone down. The words echoed inside me, like a soundtrack playing over a scene I didn't want to be part of. I wanted to belong, to fit into the family picture everyone seemed so eager to keep perfect. But every time I thought about walking through that door, I felt a wall rising inside, a cold, familiar barrier I'd built after years of disappointment. The thought of forced smiles and polite conversations made my chest tighten. I could almost hear the clink of glasses, the practiced laughter, the shallow, happy birthday that never reached the eyes. I wasn't just skipping a party, I was stepping away from the expectation that I'd keep pretending everything was fine. I remembered last year's birthday, the way he barely looked at me, the offhand comment that made me feel invisible in a crowded room. I thought about how every year the same scene repeated itself, me showing up, then retreating later, carrying the quiet ache of being seen but not known. That morning, the air outside was crisp and unforgiving. I wrapped my hands around a mug of coffee, its bitterness matching the knot in my stomach. The decision wasn't easy. There was guilt, sure, a heavy, suffocating kind, but beneath it, a flicker of relief. Maybe this time I could protect myself instead of bending to everyone else's expectations. I told myself it was just one day, one birthday I could skip without explanation. I imagined the quiet at home, the way the sun would filter through my living room window, how the silence might feel like a small refuge instead of a punishment. As the hours passed, messages kept coming, some warm, some disappointed, a few accusing me of being cold, uncaring. Each one stirred the conflict inside me again, the desire to belong pulling one way, the need for distance pulling the other. By evening, I was still home, the party far away, and the taste of regret sharp but manageable. I realized then that this choice was mine alone. I could no longer live in the shadow of what others wanted me to be. That night, I lay awake with the window slightly open, the cold air brushing against my face. I wasn't sure if I was running away or finally standing up. But I knew one thing. I couldn't keep showing up for a family that didn't see me, not like I needed to be seen. And that made all the difference. Those birthdays I skipped weren't just about one day. They were about years stacked behind me, moments I tried to bury, but kept surfacing like fogged windows I couldn't wipe clear. I remember the promises made, the ones he never kept. Birthdays he'd say, "This year will be different." But the day would come and go with the same hollow routine. Invitations sent late, then forgotten. Calls that ended abruptly, like my voice was an annoyance. I sat in rooms filled with balloons and laughter that felt forced, watching people exchange pleasantries while I felt invisible. There were times when I'd catch his eye and search for something, acknowledgement, warmth, even a flicker of pride, but found only a blank stare that looked through me. The dismissals were subtle but sharp. A joke that cut too close, a sigh when I spoke, the way his attention drifted whenever I tried to share anything real. I learned to speak softly, to laugh quietly, to shrink myself down so I wouldn't disturb the fragile image he wanted to maintain. it wasn't just him. The family followed the pattern. They pretended everything was fine, celebrating together like a perfectly scripted play while the cracks showed underneath. I felt like a guest in my own life, watching the party from the outside, carrying a quiet ache that no one asked about. I tried to convince myself that the coldness was accidental, a byproduct of busy lives, stress, or bad timing. But the truth was harder to face. The neglect wasn't careless. It was deliberate in its own way, a slow erosion of trust that left me wondering if I mattered at all. Each birthday that passed chipped away at something inside me, my hope, my confidence, the part of me that believed family meant unconditional love. I realized I was attending parties to keep the peace, not because I wanted to be there. These memories aren't just in my head. They live in the small things I notice now. The way my hands tremble slightly when I hear a birthday song. The pause before I answer calls on special days. The tightness in my chest when I think about gathering around a table with people who see me but don't really know me. The contrast is clear. Outside, there was celebration, candles, kale. They live in the small things I notice now. The way my hands tremble slightly when I hear a birthday song. The pause before I answer calls on special days. The tightness in my chest when I think about gathering around a table with people who see me but don't really know me. The contrast is clear. Outside, there was celebration, candles, cake, laughter that bounced off walls. Inside, there was silence, cold, distant, and empty. I stayed away because I was tired of pretending, because the price of showing up was too high. And now, looking back, I see how those birthdays shaped me, not into the daughter they wanted, but into the woman who finally had to choose herself. The morning of the birthday felt like any other. But then my phone rang, cutting through the quiet with a sharpness I wasn't ready for. It was my cousin. Her voice was tight, laced with judgment I hadn't expected. "Why aren't you coming? It's your dad's birthday. People are talking. They think you're cold, disrespectful." Her words landed like stones in my chest. I swallowed, feeling the weight of all the silent expectations pressing down on me. I wanted to explain, to say that it wasn't about being cold. It was about protecting what little peace I had left. But instead, I stayed quiet. That call wasn't the first, and it wouldn't be the last. Every time I chose distance, I had to justify it. Every absence became a question, a whispered accusation, a reason for someone to label me as the villain in this family story. I felt frustrated, not just at them, but at myself. The anger bubbled quietly beneath the surface, simmering in the spaces where I was supposed to feel love or connection. I wondered how something as simple as a birthday could become a battlefield where my choices were twisted and misunderstood. But there was also hurt, deeper and quieter, the kind that didn't need words to exist. It sat with me during those long moments alone, when the house was still, and I could feel the echo of what was missing. I realized that no one was asking why I stayed away. No one was listening to the reasons I had, the years of being overlooked, the repeated disappointments that built a wall between us. They just saw the absence and filled the silence with their own stories. The pressure to explain myself felt suffocating. I found myself rehearsing answers I didn't want to say, convincing others, and maybe even myself, that I wasn't the heartless one. In those moments, I began to question If I had become the villain of my own story, the daughter who couldn't forgive, who didn't try hard enough, who chose to be cold instead of loving. But beneath that doubt, a small voice whispered a different truth. Maybe the real question wasn't about what I had done, but what I had refused to accept. The call ended, leaving me staring at the phone in my hand. The noise in my head grew louder, guilt tangled with anger, confusion mixed with clarity. I realized this was more than just a missed birthday. It was the breaking point where silence could no longer protect me, and the truth, however painful, had to find its way out. And so, I chose not to answer those accusations with words. Instead, I prepared to show them the truth in a way they couldn't ignore. After that call, I felt like I was drowning in a sea of accusations and expectations, so I started looking for something solid, proof I could hold on to when everything else felt like shifting sand. I remembered the videos I had from last year's birthday, recordings I hadn't watched since that night. At first, I hesitated. The thought of reliving those moments was painful, but I knew I needed to see everything clearly, to stop doubting myself, to understand exactly what I'd been trying to protect myself from. I sat down in the quiet of my living room, the glow from the laptop screen casting a pale light on the walls. The room smelled faintly of old coffee and dust, a small comfort in the stillness. I pressed play. The video started with the usual. Laughter, the clinking of glasses, people gathered around a table. But as I watched, the surface cracks began to show. My dad was there, but his presence felt distant, like a shadow lingering at the edges. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I saw him make dismissive comments that no one seemed to catch, little remarks under his breath, the kind that cut deeper than any loud argument. The way he ignored my attempts to join conversations, his body turning away when I spoke. There was a moment when I reached out to him, trying to share a small joke, and he brushed past me like I was invisible. The camera caught the silence that followed, not awkward, but cold, deliberate. The kids were laughing nearby, but I was alone in that frame, isolated by the weight of indifference. Watching it felt like peeling back a layer of denial I'd wrapped myself in for years. I saw the emotional distance that everyone else seemed willing to overlook, the cracks beneath the family's polished surface. It wasn't just hurt I felt, it was clarity. The footage didn't lie. It showed the truth I'd known, but was afraid to face, that the coldness wasn't in me, but around me. It was painful to watch, but necessary. Each frame confirmed the reasons I'd set boundaries, the moments I'd protected myself by stepping away. I realized I wasn't the one who was cold. I was the one who finally saw clearly. When I closed the laptop, the room felt different. Heavier, yes, but also lighter in a way. I had something real now, something I could hold on to when voices told me I was wrong. That night, the silence in the house wasn't empty. It was filled with the truth I'd finally accepted, and it changed everything. I never planned to share those videos. For weeks, they stayed locked away on my laptop, a secret refuge from the world's judgment. But the calls accusing me of being cold, disrespectful, and distant kept echoing in my mind. I knew the silence wasn't protecting me anymore. It was just fueling the misunderstanding. So, I gathered the courage to press play in front of them. The family was sitting in the living room, the air thick with forced smiles and half-hearted small talk. I felt the familiar knot tighten in my stomach as I connected my laptop to the TV. I warned them gently, I want you to see something. At first, there was confusion, a few exchanged glances, unsure of what I was about to reveal. Then the footage began. The room fell into an uneasy silence as the screen showed my dad's dismissive glances, the cold distance that had been invisible in their minds, but was crystal clear to me. The smiles faded, the whispered justifications stopped. I watched their faces as the truth settled around us like a heavy fog. The cousin who had called me cold looked down, unable to meet my eyes. The aunt who always defended him shifted uncomfortably in her seat. For a moment, I expected anger, backlash, maybe even denial. But instead, there was stunned silence, the kind that breaks through years of denial and forces a reckoning. Inside me, the emotional tide was mixed. Part of me longed for validation, a nod that said, "You were right to protect yourself." Another part was wary, afraid of opening wounds too deep to heal. I felt exposed, vulnerable, yet strangely powerful. This wasn't about revenge or drama. It was about reclaiming my story, rewriting the narrative where I had been the villain. As the video ended, no one spoke for a long moment. Then my uncle finally broke the silence, his voice low and hesitant. I never saw it like this. That simple admission was a turning point. The room shifted, the old defenses cracking. Conversations that had been buried for years crept to the surface. I realized then that the power dynamic was changing. The family who once silenced me was now forced to confront what they had overlooked. It was painful for all of us, but necessary. I didn't expect apologies or grand gestures. What mattered was that the truth was finally out in the open. And as I sat there, watching their faces, I felt a quiet strength settle inside me, a calm certainty that I wasn't alone anymore, even if the path ahead was still uncertain. This moment wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something different, a chance for honesty, boundaries, and maybe, eventually, healing. After I shared the footage, the house changed. Not with loud arguments or slammed doors, but with a quiet that felt heavier than any shouting. Some relatives pulled away, their visits becoming less frequent, their calls growing colder. It was as if the truth I revealed had drawn an invisible line between what was comfortable and what couldn't be ignored. Others tried to explain it away, their voices low and hesitant. "You're taking things out of context," one said, or "That's just how he is. You know, he didn't mean it like that." But the videos didn't lie, and deep down, even they knew it. I found myself caught in a storm of emotions. Guilt that I had shattered the family's image, relief that I no longer had to carry the burden alone, and sadness for the distance growing between me and people I once thought I could rely on. The silence after the heated conversations was the hardest part. I'd find myself sitting alone with a cold cup of coffee, untouched, while the noise of the day faded into an uneasy quiet. It felt like the walls were holding their breath, waiting for something to shift, but unsure if it ever would. Some relationships that once felt solid now hovered in limbo, fragile, uncertain, maybe even broken. I realized that the closeness we'd lost might never return, not because of anger or revenge, but because the foundation had cracked too deeply. There was no dramatic finale, no sweeping reconciliation. Instead, there was distance, a slow retreat into separate corners, where old wounds lay exposed but unspoken. I didn't expect everyone to understand or even forgive. What mattered was that I had stopped hiding the truth, even if it meant standing alone. In that quiet fallout, I learned something new. Sometimes healing begins not with loud declarations, but with the gentle acceptance of change and the courage to let go. Months have passed since the storm settled. The days stretch out with a calm I never thought I'd find. I sit in my living room, where warm sunlight filters softly through the curtains, dust particles dancing quietly in the light. A cup of tea steeps slowly beside me, the steam curling upward in gentle spirals, filling the air with a faint, soothing scent. I've come to understand something important. The approval I once chased from those unwilling to see the truth no longer holds power over me. I stopped trying to fit into a role that demanded silence and submission. Instead, I've set boundaries, firm but gentle, that protect my peace and respect my worth. The relationships I nurture now feel different. They aren't built on obligation or appearances, but on genuine care and mutual respect. I'm learning to listen when someone truly shows up and to let go when they don't. It's a quiet kind of victory, one without applause or recognition, but it fills the spaces inside me that were once empty. Sometimes I think about those birthdays I missed, the calls that cut deep, the moments I questioned myself. I no longer carry that weight. Instead, I carry clarity, a quiet knowing that family isn't defined by blood or tradition, but by the daily acts of presence, kindness, and respect. The room feels still, but it's alive with the soft rhythms of my life, unfolding on my terms. I'm no longer waiting for someone else to decide what I'm worth. I am enough, exactly as I am. This isn't a triumphant ending or a dramatic reveal. It's something steadier, a slow, steady light breaking through the shadows. The kind of peace that comes when you stop fighting to be seen and start showing up for yourself. And in that quiet victory, I've finally found home.